The night that was supposed to crown a truth may have quietly exposed a performance, and now the woman who gave it a global stage, Oprah Winfrey, is no longer looking the other way. It all began with the garden. Sunlight spilling like innocence, cameras rolling like silent witnesses, and Meghan Markle sitting across from the most trusted interviewer in the world, speaking in that calm, controlled tone that felt almost too perfect, too measured, too rehearsed. 61 million people leaned in, believing they were about to hear the rawest truth ever told about the royal family. And at first, it worked. It really worked. She said she was naive, said she barely knew the royal family, said she walked into that world blind. It sounded vulnerable. It sounded human. But here's where the cracks started forming. Quietly, almost invisibly at first. Because outside that garden, outside that perfectly framed shot, there were voices. Old voices. Voices from her past that didn't match the story at all. A childhood friend saying Meghan had been obsessed with royalty for years, watching Princess Diana's wedding again and again, studying the system she later claimed she didn't understand. So which version was real? The innocent outsider or the long game strategist? The answer didn't come immediately. It simmered, it lingered, and then the interview kept going. Because this wasn't just storytelling. This was demolition. Claims of emotional isolation. Claims of being denied help. And then that moment, the one that froze the entire world mid-breath. The suggestion that someone inside the royal family had concerns about Archie's skin color. No names, just enough detail to ignite a global firestorm. And suddenly, silence from the palace wasn't just tradition anymore. It felt like tension. A carefully worded response arrived later, carrying 5 quiet words that hit harder than any denial ever could. Some recollections may vary. Not an attack, not a defense, just a subtle surgical doubt planted into the narrative. And that's when something shifted. Because once doubt enters a story like this, it spreads fast. People started rewinding, rewatching, re-examining. And what they found wasn't just inconsistencies, it was patterns. Take the moment Meghan described riding in a car with Queen Elizabeth II, painting a soft, almost cinematic image of warmth, of the Queen placing a blanket over her knees like a caring grandmother. It sounded intimate, personal, almost too perfect. But when analysts pulled the actual footage frame by frame, that moment didn't exist. The Queen placed the blanket over herself. Meghan sat beside her, untouched by that gesture. A small detail? Maybe, but in a story built entirely on emotional authenticity, even one manufactured moment becomes explosive. And then came the backyard wedding claim, the secret ceremony, just the two of them exchanging vows privately before the world ever saw the royal spectacle. It sounded romantic, it sounded rebellious, it sounded like something out of a movie, but reality doesn't bend that easily, because under English law, that kind of wedding simply cannot exist. No witnesses, no legal standing, no legitimacy. And when the Archbishop of Canterbury himself stepped in, carefully clarifying that the only legal wedding happened on the public day, it wasn't just a contradiction. It was a quiet dismantling of a core claim, delivered by someone who had everything to lose by speaking incorrectly. And still, the unraveling didn't stop, because now people were looking at everything, even the visuals, even the headlines shown during the broadcast. A montage meant to prove relentless media attacks suddenly looked curated, altered headlines, foreign articles presented as British. One headline even published after Meghan and Harry had already left the royal family, yet positioned as part of the reason they left. That's not just storytelling anymore, that's narrative construction. And when legal letters started flying towards CBS and Harpo Productions demanding corrections, the response was chillingly simple. They stood by everything. And somewhere behind all of this, behind the polished edit and global applause, there was Oprah, watching, observing, processing, because this wasn't her first interview. She had spent decades reading people, spotting the difference between truth and performance. And something about this didn't sit right. The chicken coop scene, so casual, so real, later revealed to be freshly staged. The brand new sign. The curated simplicity. It wasn't authenticity. It was design. And for someone like Oprah, that distinction is everything. But the real shift didn't happen on camera. It happened off it. A request that should never have been made. Meghan's team asking to review the final edit before it aired. In journalism, that's not just unusual, it's unacceptable. And Oprah knew it instantly, because that request trust doesn't come from someone sharing their truth. It comes from someone managing it, controlling it, shaping it before the world ever sees it. And that's when the realization hit. This wasn't just an interview. It was a launch. A calculated, carefully structured media event designed to reposition an entire narrative. And Oprah wasn't the interviewer. She was the platform. Everything that followed, the deals, the fallout, the quiet industry whispers, started from that moment, that garden, that conversation, that illusion of raw honesty that piece by piece began to fracture under scrutiny. And now, years later, the silence between Oprah and Meghan is louder than anything said that night. Because in Hollywood, silence isn't absence, it's a verdict. And the story, it didn't end in that garden, that was just the beginning. And this is where the story stops pretending to be a misunderstanding and starts looking like a pattern no one in power can ignore anymore. Because what happened after that interview wasn't just backlash, it was exposure, slow and surgical, coming from places Meghan and Prince Harry never expected. Not tabloids, not royal insiders, but the very industry that welcomed them with open arms the moment they walked away from the palace. Deals worth millions, platforms built overnight, opportunities most people never even dream of. And yet somehow everything started slipping through their fingers like something fundamentally wasn't working behind the scenes. It began quietly with Spotify. A massive deal, huge expectations, endless headlines about a new era of storytelling. But what actually came out? Just a handful of episodes. One podcast. Silence where there should have been momentum. And then, just like that, the deal ended. No dramatic press conference, no public fight, just a door closing. But the real shock came after, when one of Spotify's top executives openly mocked the entire partnership, calling them grifters in a moment that didn't feel like frustration anymore. It felt like someone finally saying out loud what others had been whispering behind closed doors. That kind of language doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from experience, from promises not met, from expectations collapsing in real time. And it didn't stop there, because the cracks were spreading across Hollywood itself. Netflix, the company that had invested heavily in their future, reportedly found out about the explosive Oprah interview the same way the public did, through headlines. No warning, no coordination. The very platform funding their brand left completely in the dark about the biggest media move of their lives. That's not just miscommunication, that's a breakdown in trust. And in an industry built entirely on relationships, trust is everything. Once it fractures, everything else follows. Then came the moments that don't make official statements but speak louder than any headline ever could. Sundance. Real offers on serious projects. And yet filmmakers chose less money just to avoid attaching their work to the Sussex name. Think about that. Walking away from a bigger deal isn't business as usual. It's a signal, a quiet but unmistakable decision that reputation had become a liability, not an asset. And somewhere in those boardrooms, behind polite smiles and professional language, something had clearly shifted. Back inside Harpo Productions, that same shift had already taken root much earlier. Oprah had seen the warning signs in real time, the staged moments, the controlled narrative, the subtle attempts to steer the story. But what stayed with her wasn't just what was said publicly, it was what was shared privately. Small details, personal choices, a certain attitude toward the very institution Meghan had publicly framed as oppressive, moments that didn't match the victim narrative being delivered to millions. And for someone who built her entire career on reading authenticity, that contradiction wasn't just noticeable, it was impossible to ignore. So what happens when one of the most powerful media figures in the world realizes she may have been used? She doesn't shout, she doesn't retaliate, she goes quiet. And that silence started showing up everywhere. No public appearances together, no supportive posts, no mentions when it mattered most. When Meghan launched her brand, when she celebrated milestones, when visibility was everything, Oprah said nothing. And in Hollywood, nothing is never accidental. It's a message, a calculated absence that tells everyone watching exactly where things stand without saying a single word. And then came the moment that slipped past most people but spoke volumes to those paying attention. A casual podcast appearance, a light joke, and suddenly Oprah mispronounces Sussex in a way that turns it into a punchline. The room laughs, she laughs, and just like that, the dynamic flips. The same names that once carried weight now carried humor. And when someone like Oprah turns you into a joke, even briefly, it's not a mistake. It's a signal that whatever alliance once existed no longer does. Meanwhile, the public perception outside those elite circles was shifting just as dramatically. Paul's placing Meghan among the most disliked public figures. Industry leaders openly questioning her talent. Media coverage slowly changing tone, not Not explosive, not aggressive, just colder, more skeptical, more distant. The kind of shift that doesn't need headlines because it's happening everywhere at once. And yet, despite all of that, the image machine kept running. Appearances, events, carefully curated moments designed to rebuild what had been lost. But then came a moment that cut through all of it. A visit meant to show compassion, empathy, connection, a meeting with survivors, a moment of human vulnerability captured on camera. And then, almost immediately after, those same clothes, worn in that emotional setting, appearing online for sale. Clickable, profitable, monetized within minutes. The contrast was so sharp, so immediate, it didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt like strategy. And the reaction was instant, harsh, unforgiving. Because there are lines the public might forgive crossing, but blending tragedy with commerce isn't one of them. And standing in the middle of all of this was Harry, watching, participating, complicit in a story that had long moved beyond just one person. Because every decision, every deal, every narrative choice carried both of their names. And the further things unraveled, the harder it became to separate intention from consequence. By the time 2026 arrived, the shift was undeniable. The same world that once amplified their voices had grown quieter around them. The same industry that once invested millions was now offering less, expecting less, promising less. Doors weren't slamming shut, they were simply no longer opening. And that's the part no one says out loud. There's no single moment where everything collapses. No dramatic ending. Just a slow, steady withdrawal of attention, support, and belief. A story that once dominated global headlines, now struggling to hold the same grip. And at the center of it all, that original moment in the garden still echoing, still being re-examined, still raising the same uncomfortable question: was it ever the truth people believed it was, or was it something far more carefully constructed, revealed piece by piece only after the world had already decided to believe it?